afternoon, everyone. May I please ask you to kindly take a seat? So, welcome to the Global Landscape Forum. We are all here for some common purposes, I guess. We are here because we want to connect, because we want to share, learn, and act together. So I first of all want to thank the audience here today. We have almost more 1,000 people here sitting in this room. We also have people all around the world today online with us, so thanks also to them for being connected through our social media and also with the live streaming. Well, let me please give you some technical information about the GLF, so the days that are coming with us. So, first of all, on our website, you can find the resources concerning our agenda updates. Also, with your registration badge, remember that you have free access to all the Bonn's public transport system, so do not lose it, please. As well, simultaneous translation will be provided throughout the event. Pick up your device outside where the cloakroom is and put a note in your agenda, because this afternoon we're going to have an event with partially in Spanish. As well, due to security reasons, as you might see, we are many people around these days, so the discussion for these venues have limited capacity. So please keep in mind and be mindful to attend this event, also joining different sessions as well. As I told you before, we have various activities ongoing throughout the entirety of the event, such as pavilion and landscape talks. To be fresh and ready for these days, all food and beverage provided at the event will be vegetarian. Coffee break and lunch will occur in the lobby and pavilions area next door. To be online and always updated, we have the Wi-Fi password that you can find it in the printed agenda. GLF staff is always available for you throughout the entire event with anything you may need. So please look for the green lanyards or go to the information booths which are located at the registration desk. Another point, and I try to be as quick as I can, please listen for announcements regarding agenda with the PA system. You can also view a coming session on digital sign throughout the venue. I will ask our guests and speakers to please stick to the time because the schedule today is really tight. So now let's start and let's go into the first session of the GLF, and I want to please give a warm welcome to Robert Nazy, Director General of C4. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good morning, everybody, or the 1,000 people or more or less in the room, and good morning, evening, or good night for the 5,000 people that are online from 114 countries and that are going to enjoy and follow this Global Landscape Forum 2017 in Bonn. Life is like a landscape. You live in the midst of it, but you can describe it only from the vantage point of a distance. And this is a quote by Charles Lindbergh, and I think it's a good quote to explain what we think as a landscape. The humanity is faced with a lot of wicked problems. Most of these problems we have created by ourselves. We are depleting Earth resources faster than they can regenerate, and at least for the foreseeable future, we only have one planet, so there is no plan B. So we must act now. And to act, we must overcome all the short-term sectoral interests and address the problem looking at all the individual elements, both social and biophysical. And now the distribution and articulation create a whole that is bigger than the sum of the parts. And this all has new emerging properties and characteristics, and that's what we call a landscape. And this landscape is, I believe, the right unit of management. We do have these problems that are global in nature and in wicked in essence. And if we try to solve this problem looking only sector by sector, looking at forests, looking at agriculture, looking at cities, we are not going to solve them. Our only hope to solve the problem, or at least to mitigate the impact of this problem, is to look at the whole picture, and that whole picture is the thing that we have named for the lack of a better determination, the landscape approach. And at this stage, many people ask me often, but what is a landscape? And I don't think it matters. I think we can get bogged down for the next 30 years trying to define a landscape, like we have been trying to define what is a forest since I've started working in this business in 1981. And nobody has really managed to create a universal definition of forest, but everybody in this room in a forest is able to tell that he or she is in a forest or outside the forest. So it's the same for a landscape. What defines the landscape is the eye of the beholder. I mean, it's sort of an ant will see a landscape a different way than an elephant, even if they are looking at the same thing. For a farmer, the landscape is his or her farm, the surrounding area, and the neighbor, if they have any. For the governor of Aceh, the landscape is the province of Aceh. So, in a sense, the landscape is something that can be defined, what is your problem and what you want to look at, and how you want to use this concept of landscape. And although it's fuzzy in its definition, I think it's the right unit to try to solve problems. And it's not something that can be reduced to a simple definition. We can have many operational definitions of a landscape. We do have many, in fact. But I don't think it's very useful to spend much time in trying to define and squeeze it in a very narrowly accepted definition. The problem we have with landscape is that there is no really actual governance in place or multi-stakeholder platform that really handles this type of fuzzy management system or management unit and this type of discussion between, within, and across sectors. So where people can talk about this issue of landscape, sustainable development in terms of policy and change, and this is something that we would like to offer as the Global Landscape Forum. What we are offering here is a platform or a set of platforms to address the wicked question of unsustainable development, climate change at the various scale, global, local, national, or subnational. We started this story of the Global Landscape Forum in relation mainly to the question of forest, trees, and agriculture. But we must expand the focus from landscape to seascape. A lot of what is happening in seascape is very much influenced by what is happening upstream. And if you have 60% of the world's population living in coastal area, and these people are the ones that are going to be most impacted by climate change, sea level rise, tsunami, and whatnot, if we want to address these kinds of problems, then we need to consider the landscape, what it means for these people upstream down to 200 meters deep in the water. And that's where you come back to Lindbergh's quote on the GLF will offer us, or you, a vantage point from where we can describe and understand landscape and contribute to the achievement of the SDG and the various Paris Agreement or IG target. Now, as I am a member and I've been a staff of a research organization, what's the role of science in all this? And we believe that research science should inform the debate, and that is to provide the best available evidence at one point of time and say, okay, this is what we know, and this is what are the consequences of the various actions you can do or want to do. Then ultimately, others will take that information and choose which path to follow. As an individual, a researcher, you can have an opinion and which path is better than the other. As a researcher, if you want to be unbiased or you claim to be unbiased, you must provide the various paths based on evidence. And my belief is that research is never truly unbiased, and as we are all stakeholders in the problem we address, we have to do our best to find the most appropriate solution. And it is why it is important to understand that what we do as a research center is not only research, but it's also capacity development so that people can understand the consequences of the decision, and also translating our research results into policy guidance document so that policymakers have the information they need to guide their individual decision. To end my introductory speech, you will hear multiple voices during these 2 days that will rise to enrich the discussion over the next 2 days. Voice presenting various perspectives on landscape from over 100 countries across all the continents. Voice representing government, the private sector, indigenous community, youth, institution, development agency. This voice has one thing in common. They seek to find holistic solution to the world's most pressing challenge, and by looking at this through the landscape lens. We welcome them with open arms and open minds so that together we can help shape a more sustainable planet as a legacy for future generations. And in this spirit, and on behalf of the GLF movement, I would like for you, please join me in welcoming the first of these voices, Her Excellencies Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, President of the Republic of Mauritius, for our keynote speech.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, fellow scientists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure to address the Global Landscape Forum in Bonn, just as the GLF series enters into a new phase of influence and impact. I commend in particular the determination of the GLF to build on the broad engagement of and contributions by many organizations and its values that prioritize collective action. As an organic chemist, biodiversity scientist, and president of a small island developing state, the GLF's mission is close to my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, as well all know, the world's diverse but vitally important landscapes are under stress. The threats to biodiversity are grave, more so in Africa than anywhere else. African species are disappearing at almost twice the global rate, driven inexorably by habitat loss, the introduction of non-invasive species, and humanity's ever-expanding footprint. According to the United Nations Environmental Programme report on the state of biodiversity in Africa, the biodiversity of our continent continues to decline, with ongoing loss of species and habitats across every one of our 54 nations. This has been caused directly and indirectly by human actions, which include extraction, deforestation, poaching, and harmful processes such as slash-and-burn agriculture. Particularly threatened are Africa's freshwater ecosystems. To make matters more urgent, the effects of all these pressures are being further amplified by climate change. Civil societies have long recognized the imperative of slowing biodiversity loss on the African continent. To this end, the Convention on Biological Diversity held in Japan in 2010 ratified the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. The plan consists of a mission, vision, goals, and specific targets for protecting biodiversity in Africa, collectively known as the HE biodiversity targets. Progress in achieving the HE targets in Africa is mixed. A periodic status report, the Global Biodiversity Outlook, tells us that Africa lags behind the rest of the world in terms of improving knowledge and dedicating financial, institutional, and technical resources to more forcefully address and mitigate the decline in biodiversity. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, also lacks appropriate and harmonized biodiversity indicators to assess conservation needs and progress against goals, and suffer from data and information deficiencies. The dearth of readily available information on Africa biodiversity presents a barrier to accurately assessing the status, trends, threats, and conservation needs for biodiversity in Africa. But there are some encouraging indicators. Over 80% of countries in Africa show progress on updating national biodiversity strategies and action plans, facilitating their implementations and use as policy instruments. The continent has promoted the mainstreaming and understanding of the values of biodiversity, designating protected areas, ratifying an international protocol on access and benefit sharing, updating national action plans, and respecting the traditional knowledge and values of indigenous peoples. The role of women in traditional cultures in maintaining its biodiversity cannot be overstated. UNEP recognizes that for many women, biodiversity is a cornerstone of their work, their belief systems, and their basic survival. For indigenous and local communities in particular, direct links with the land are fundamental, and obligations to maintain these links form the core of individual and group identity. These relationships extend far back into human history, when divisions of responsibilities by gender began. Scientists have discovered that as early as the early Stone Age, women's role and task in hunter-gatherer communities were explicitly linked to biodiversity with the natural environment, in essence, determining the status and well-being. And UNEP also finds, and I shall quote, in many regions, up to 90% of the planting materials of the poorest farming communities may be derived from the seeds and germplasm from the communities produce, select, and save themselves. Women farmers have been largely responsible for the improvement and adaptation of many plant varieties, fulfilling nurturing and stewardship roles, unquote. As we modernize, we must support traditional knowledge systems, such as those related to sustainable agriculture. Among the features of this preservation are enlightened agriculture and trade policies, intellectual property rights on the conservation and sustainable use of biological resources, the empowerment of women as stewards of this ecosystem, and the equitable sharing of benefits. In this regard, ladies and gentlemen, the examples and lessons of experience of Mauritius, a small African country, may be illustrative. Mauritius is a nation of just 1.3 million inhabitants that lies 680 miles to the southeast coast of the African continent. The Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund recognizes it as one of the 5 global biodiversity hotspots, along with our island neighbors in the Western Indian Ocean. Together, we are home to an astounding total of 8 plant families, 4 bird families, and 5 primate families that are found nowhere else on Earth. In thinking of the relationship between climate change and loss of biodiversity, it is illustrative to think of the co-relationship of diabetes to coronary artery disease, comorbidity. Each condition in multivariate and interdependent. It is therefore difficult to address biodiversity loss without addressing climate change. As all of you are aware, the management of climate change, like the sustainable management of biodiversity, represents a complex interdependence of many factors, touching upon aspects of the environment, culture, and the economy. Economic modeling of the impact of climate change on Africa predicts a mean average global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2040, with cost equivalent to 1.7% of Africa's GDP. And as the mean temperature rises to 2.2 degrees centigrade by 2060, economic costs increase to the equivalent of 3.4%. And by the end of the century, with a mean temperature rise of 4.1 degrees centigrade, the economic costs are predicted to be equivalent to just under 10% of the continent's GDP. Ladies and gentlemen, the oceanscapes that cover the globe and surround Mauritius provide a framework for how the pressures of financial well-being and culture impact a major source of food and energy that serves as an incubator for biodiversity. Oceans are home to about 2 million species, from the largest animal that have ever lived to the tiniest bacterium. Marine biodiversity far outweighs that on land. Oceans cover 71% of our planet's surface, are a life support system for Earth to provide more than half of the oxygen we breathe. They are central to the planetary water cycle that produces rain and snow and nourish more than 1 billion people by providing their primary source of animal protein. The oceans also regulate global climate, mediate temperatures, and drive the weather, determining rainfall, droughts, and flood. They are the world's largest store of carbon. An estimated 83% of the global carbon cycle is circulated through marine waters. Africa's plant and animal biodiversity in the water, on land, and in the sky is a great source of natural wealth. This is especially critical in my island country, Mauritius, by any standard, is tiny. But even though it is, and neighbor islands are designated as biodiversity hotspots, almost 100 species have become extinct since the arrival of man in the 17th century, and only 2% of the native forests remain. Clearly, combating climate change and biodiversity loss, including the invasion of non-native plant and animal species, is an urgent imperative. As an African leader who has spent much of her career in academic science, I feel an obligation to build a bridge between our environment and scientific research. The vital threats of biodiversity loss and climate change are themselves nested in the drive to advance human well-being and health. And the effectiveness of driving human health and well-being is leveraged by a continued investment in research and innovation. And this is why I agreed to serve as chair of the Coalition for African Research and Innovation, known as CARI, because this broad Pan-African organization was created by private and public stakeholders in recognition that our health and well-being are at the nexus of not just the interdependent, transdisciplinary nature of scientific research, but a part of a broader context at the intersection of nutrition, health, agriculture, environment, governance, and the economy. These investments require sustained operational funding and capital support, and the capacity to engage successfully with funders, government, policymakers, and communities. Ladies and gentlemen, only significant and simultaneous investment in the many elements of environmental preservation and scientific research, namely public-private investment in basic and applied research, building access to sustainable resources, creating the legal, regulatory, and policy conditions to encourage research and sustainable economies, policy development and education, training in research and innovation here on the continent will help create a robust research and innovation environment that leads to the deceleration of biodiversity loss, a slowing of rate of climate change, less disease, more prosperity, and more independence in Africa. I believe that the separation between the haves and the have-nots across the globe in the years to come will be defined by our investment in research and innovation to develop new opportunities for environment protection and economic growth. As a scientist, I can regard research not as an expense, but as an investment in our common future. In Africa, we face barriers even higher than in as much as the rest of the world. Our continent is home to 15% of the global population, produces only 3% of its GDP, while carrying 25% of disease burden. Africa only accounts for just 2% of world research output, 1.3% of research spending, and 0.1% of patents. On a macroeconomic level, we are persistently dependent on short-term aid, undermining the obligations of our own government to create the right conditions to attract private investment and to fully exercise our political will in our interest. This, in turn, dilutes our ability to create robust infrastructure, set our own agenda, take control of our research activities, and fully profit from our own economy. Moreover, the effects of climate change are already acute in Africa. Observable effects on water resources, including flood, drought, change in distribution of rainfall, drying up of rivers, melting of glaciers, and receding bodies of water. Drought, heat stress and flooding have led to a reduction in crop yields and livestock productivity and the destruction of homes, shelters, and villages across the continent's vast landscape. Conflict over resources also exacerbate this impact and in turn contribute to ongoing migration within and between African countries in Africa. The United Nations report predicts that access to water will be the single biggest cause of conflict and war in the next generation. Climate change and biodiversity loss and their impact on agriculture and therefore food security adds urgency to our fight against poverty and diseases in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, a recent study by Ezekiel Njeru and colleagues found that agro-biodiversity conservation is vital to attaining sustainable agricultural systems in the continent of limited external inputs and climate change. This is why the scholarly community assembled at the first International Agro-Biodiversity Congress last year adopted the Delhi Declaration on Agro-Biodiversity Management. The evidence is strong and growing that we must invest in and improve sustainable food systems to meet many of our SDGs. The broad element of healthy, diverse diet, seed and crop diversity, improvement in seed and crop delivery and cultivation, and the maintenance of our agrobiodiversity must be optimized to ensure a healthy and prosperous future for all our people. The magnitude of the task cannot be overstated. There is no scholarly consensus even on the number of plant species on Earth, much less on the best strategy to protect and benefit from them. Let me sketch one example. The Kew Royal Botanical Garden estimates that there are over 5,500 food plant species and almost 18,000 medicinal species, though some credible estimates that are over 75,000. Biodiversity scientists and myself know that solutions require knowledge, and knowledge starts with good data. This is why we need a universal agrobiodiversity index, another consensus imperative. This will be an important step towards developing the common understanding necessary to find global solutions to the human challenge of enduring health prosperity across the world. A major finding of the post-Paris Climate Accord UNFAO study is that hunger, poverty, biodiversity loss, and climate change need to be tackled together. Farmers, pastoralists, fisherfolk, community foresters depend on activities that are intimately and inextricably linked to the environment, and that these groups are also the most vulnerable to climate change. Securing the sustainable management, viability, and security of the world landscape will require far greater access to data, technologies, markets, information, and credit for investment to adjust the production systems and practices to our changing climate. We must bring all possible human, financial resources to bear on creating a movement to protect our biodiversity and fight climate change and create a better Earth for people everywhere. The challenge is not easy. Reaching it depends on the contribution of highly skilled individuals from everywhere in the world, smart organizations, and broad, inclusive coalitions such as the DLF, and ambitious initiatives such as CARI. But it can be done because it must be done. Ladies and gentlemen, as I close, the GLF is an essential building block as we seek to build a sustainable future across the world's diverse landscape, a future that is bolstered by world-class training and scientific productivity here in Africa and elsewhere in the world. I'm confident that through commitment to scientific excellence, increased investment in research and development, and the power of partnership, the GLF can improve the everyday lives of citizens across the world. And our ability to create a sustainable future for ourselves is not optional. It is existential. Science needs to increasingly find solutions that are economically viable, socially relevant, environmentally benign, and for all these, political will and leadership is needed. We need to capitalize on the momentum gained in the global environment and conservation movement, but recognize that all actions are local. We need to emphasize the maintenance and sustainable use of our natural capital. recognize the important role of women and local communities. We need to mobilize cutting-edge technology, recognize the value of indigenous knowledge, cultural traditions, forge partnership anchored in the common good for the benefit of all. We need to become the voice of change. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do you want to stay with us on stage, or yes, sure, please. Now, we were having various contingency plans, but I see that Minister Hendricks is here, so we can go back to the normal and plan. So I will ask our further contributor to come to the stage, to have a seat, and then they will go to the lectern to give their speech. And to make sure that I don't say something wrong, I need to check exactly. So we do have first Barbara Hendricks, the Federal Minister for the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety, BMUB. Would you please come, Minister? And the minister just made the déplacement just right now and just landed in Cologne a couple of minutes ago. I think so. Thank you very much. We have a seat first.
Okay.
Have a seat first. I will call. Then we have Dr. Stefan Schmitz, the Deputy Director General and Commissioner of the One World No Hunger Initiative in the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Stefan. Our old friend Erik Solheim, the Executive Director of the UN Environment. Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Karin Kemper, the Senior Director for the Environment and Natural Resources in the Global Practice in the World Bank. Okay, we do have an impressive list of speakers, and without further ado, I will erase myself. No, I see that the chair is coming, so I will sit over there, and I will ask the Minister Hendricks to give a allocation.
President Gurib-Fakim, Minister Pohl, dear Erik Solheim, Robert Nasi, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Just over a year ago, we met at the last Global Landscape Forum in Marrakesh. At the forum's closing event, Germany announced that it would host the Global Landscapes Forum from 2017 and provide a new home for the forum in Bonn for the next few years. Today, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to Bonn. I am delighted that we have been able to follow through on our announcement in cooperation with the organizers. In my view, the Global Landscapes Forum is a perfect addition to the UN city of Bonn. The international focus on global climate, environmental, and development policy is an unmistakable common feature between the Global Landscapes Forum and Bonn. And I have no doubt that this will lead to valuable synergies on all sides. The challenges facing the international community are large, are huge. Climate change, and the loss of natural resources and biodiversity. If we want to master these challenges, we have to make the land use sector a focus of our efforts. There are currently a number of different processes aimed at solving global environmental crises. The key formal processes are the Rio Conventions on climate change, mitigation and adaptation, on conserving biological diversity, and on tackling desertification. Voluntary processes such as the New York Declaration on Forests and the Bonn Challenge on Forest Restoration also play an important role, in particular in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. As you can see, there are plenty of opportunities for synergies, exchanges, and cooperation. What is important is to agree on effective measures and to be willing to make compromises and trade-offs. For example, not all measures that are feasible for climate action would have a positive impact on biodiversity, conservation. In other words, we have to find smart solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be aware of the scale of the challenge facing us. The fact that the international community agreed on the 2 degrees goal at the Paris Climate Change Conference does not automatically mean that everyone is now acting in concert. We will still have tough negotiations about wording at the annual climate change conference in future. However, at the COP23 last month here in Bonn, we proved that we can be successful. And at the climate summit in Paris, hosted by President Macron 1 week ago, we reaffirmed that we would persevere with our efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, the Global Landscapes Forum is an important source of ideas. It is the world's largest independent action platform for the land use sector. It creates and pools the expertise that is so urgently required. It also enables a structured dialogue between all stakeholders beyond national interests and priorities. The Global Landscapes Forum creates space for innovative ideas that can then be implemented on the ground. The overarching goal is to learn from one another and take action together. Ladies and gentlemen, the list of pressing issues that require close expert exchanges over the coming years is long. Allow me to name just a few examples. Restoring and protecting forests and landscapes, improving the basis of livelihoods in rural areas, sustainable management of peatlands, and private sector participation by means of creative investment options. I hope that we will be able to step up this exchange in the years to come, and that there will be many cases of taking action together. I am confident that the innovative format that you are using together here at the forum will lead to good outcomes. I wish you all every success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Stefan, if you would like.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Bonn on behalf of the German Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Dr. Gerd Müller. The future of humankind will be decided first and foremost in rural areas. More than 70% of all people in the world who are suffering from poverty and hunger live in rural areas. Poverty and hunger have a rural face. Unemployment has a rural face. Environmental degradation is essentially rural. And it is the rural world with its natural resources that is threatened most by climate change. If poverty and hunger, high rates of youth unemployment, protracted crisis, environmental degradation and climate change come together, terrorism and conflicts and forced migration can take root easily. In Africa, our neighboring continent, 1 in 2 young people is giving thought to leaving his or her rural home. Rural areas simply do not provide enough options to meet the aspirations of young generation in particular. And the more the exploitation and degradation of the natural assets of the rural world advance, the harder it becomes to provide decent livelihoods. Entire landscapes are at risk of devastation. More poverty, more hunger, despair and rootlessness would be the result. This is obviously not acceptable. That is why the rural world clearly deserves greater political attention. The concept note of the Global Landscape Forum says, sustainable landscapes are essential for the future we want, for food, livelihoods, health, renewable materials, energy, biodiversity, business development, trade, climate regulation, and water. I could not agree more. Landscapes for people and for the planet, that is what we must achieve. We need to make sure that rural areas are not left behind, that people and the environment in the countryside will not become the losers of globalization. Young people in particular have the potential to become leaders of change for an inclusive rural transformation. But they need support and a conducive environment to use the potential. In April this year, the BMZ hosted the G20 conference, One World, No Hunger, the Future of the Rural World in Berlin. In preparation for this conference, we reached out to 10,000 young people in Africa through a text message survey and asked about their views on how they want to live. More than half of them said they would consider leaving their rural areas if conditions did not improve. But at the same time, more than 90% saw a brighter future if the general conditions in rural areas changed. So what needs to change? What would be a conducive environment for making rural landscapes attractive places to live? I would like to encourage you to take a look at the Berlin Charter adopted at this G20 conference. There you will find some answers to these questions from young people and other stakeholders. We now have 2 days to discuss this. Let me just share some ideas and questions that merit more in-depth discussion. How can we ensure that the necessary increase in agricultural production will be sustainable? How can we balance competing interests between the protection and the sustainable use of natural resources in landscapes? How can we balance the need for forest protection with the need to produce more food? What are the main drivers of deforestation? How can we address them? How can we incorporate multi-sectoral approaches in existing policies and implement them in development programs? What role do we see for land use planning, and how do we ensure the participation of rural communities? These are just some of the many questions that BMZ is faced with as we implement our development programs. The BMZ launched the One World No Hunger initiative 4 years ago. We have been investing about 1.5 billion euros per year in agriculture, food security, and rural development. That is about 20% of the entire BMZ annual budget. Germany has become one of the leading donors in this field. Under the AFR 100, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, we are working with the World Resources Institute, NEPAD, and more than 20 African partner countries. This initiative is a country-led effort to rehabilitate 100 million hectares of deforested and degraded landscapes across Africa by 2030. This is our strong contribution to the New York Declaration on Forests and the Bonn Challenge. Our engagement in forestry has increased significantly. Our current investment portfolio comprises about 2 billion euros in more than 200 ongoing projects. The new BMZ Forest Action Plan addresses the conservation and sustainable use of forests, as well as the restoration of forest landscapes and the promotion of deforestation-free supply chains. We are doing this in close cooperation with our partner countries and with national and international partner agencies from civil society, the private sector, and academia. And finally, I'm very glad to announce that we agreed to provide, together with the Federal Ministry for the Environment, funding amounting to 11 million euros for the Global Landscapes Forum. There is hardly any field where people and the environment, human development, and natural resource management are as closely interlinked as in landscape management. Man and biosphere cannot be separated. That is what sustainability is all about. This challenging task requires a broad and high-level dialogue based on evidence. The Global Landscapes Forum plays a decisive role in facilitating such dialogue. Germany is very grateful to CIFER and other partners for providing this platform for exchange. This, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what we need in order to achieve sustainable landscapes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Eric, if you want.
Madam President, dear Barbara, friends, good morning. One of the wisest human beings who has ever walked on planet Earth, Mahatma Gandhi, once said, "The difference between what we humans are doing and what we are able to do is sufficient to solve all global problems." And 2017 was really the year where we saw this difference. On one hand, Mother Earth hit back. The most Googled phenomenon in 2017 was Hurricane Irma, which hit with enormous intensity to the people in the Caribbean. At the same time, the city of Houston was flooded. In South Asia and India and Bangladesh, we saw big floods. We saw landslides in Sierra Leone. We saw drought in Somalia. There were any number of negative climate and environment events. Mother Earth did hit back because we did what we do. But it was also a year we showed what we are able to do. Any number of examples. President Macron just had a very successful climate event in Paris. Here in Bonn, 1 month back, Canada and the United Kingdom launched the Anti-Coal Alliance, and looked at the following fact. United Kingdom, which was the one nation on planet Earth really founded on coal. The Industrial Revolution happened in the United Kingdom because there was abundance of coal and there were waterways to take it around. That's why it started there. Now the United Kingdom is phasing out coal. It's at 2% of its energy mix from coal. Canada the same. And here in Germany, of course, we see the Energiewende. In summer, Germany was more than 100% renewable. You can't do it in winter, but it shows how fast this transformation is happening. At the 19th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, which recently ended, President Xi Jinping, according to some people who really counter this, spoke more about the environment than about the economy, launching slogans like ecological civilization as the funding underpinning of China, and slogans like green is gold, and we see the results. This has, of course, not started at the party conference, but I was just in Beijing in winter. The sky was blue, the clouds were white. Not to say that there will not be pollution in Beijing in the future, it will be. But there is a drastic reduction of pollution thanks to Environment Minister Li and his and others' efforts. And you can move on to India, where Prime Minister Modi has put India on a completely new development path, which includes solar energy, wind energy, rapid economic growth, getting people out of poverty, but taking care of the environment exactly at the same time. So yes, indeed, we are doing what we should not do, but we're also showing our ability to change. And of course, if we really want to change, landscapes is at the center of that, and that's why we are together here. And that's basically a no-brainer. Maybe not the right environment phrase, but here we can kill 3 birds with 1 stone. We can take care of the climate. 1/3 of what we need to do for climate is landscapes, according to recent studies. Here we can take care of the biodiversity and some of the most beautiful animals on the planet, the orangutans, the gorillas, the jaguars, all these fantastic butterflies, insects, snakes, the enormous biodiversity of the forest. And we can reduce pollution and haze. Remind yourself that the enormous killing force of the haze in Indonesia was so negative for Singapore and Indonesia 2 years back. But the government of Indonesia is taking action, and there is any reason to believe that the chance of such a haze will be much less in the future. It has been much better the last 2 years because of this action, and maybe also because of good weather, but action also matters. So this is at the core of what we need to do. But I will suggest that if we want to really be successful, we need to broaden our perspective. This group is the group of the converted. We are basically all environmentalists, believing in the green message, and nothing is wrong with that. To the contrary, you are the people we need to drive this agenda globally. Without you, nothing will happen. But we also need to broaden our net. We need to speak more to local communities. I'm just back from Botswana, one of the greatest conservation and landscapes success stories on the planet. Why is that? Well, they have turned protecting the elephants and all the iconic species of Botswana into an enormous economic success story, which of course make the local people of Botswana the first to defend the biodiversity, because it's their income and their beauty at the same time. Botswana has now, tourism is the second biggest income earner, and it's sustainable tourism, which can provide an example to so many others. So let's work with local people. Secondly, we need to see landscapes as a job creation vehicle. People need jobs. So 1 million young people joining the labor market in Africa every month. Another 1 million people joining the labor market in South Asia every month. All of them want jobs. As you, they want to provide for a family, want income, something interesting to do. They want jobs. But of course, the good news is that there are any number of good, clean, green jobs to be had in the green sectors of the economy, in the solar and wind renewables, but also in the landscapes. The more we can provide good agriculture solutions, better protection of national parks, the more good jobs we will create. So let's link job creation and taking care of the landscapes. If you want one example, in Rwanda, it will now cost you $1,500 to see the gorillas per person. So if you bring a family, it's quite costly. But obviously, it brings also an enormous income to provide for taxi drivers, hotel owners, guides, restaurant people, all the people who live in the community and who gain jobs from this protection of the gorillas, and they are the first-line defenders of the gorillas. So local people, jobs. Third is business. Time has gone from the time where we could provide for agriculture, rainforest, or other ecosystems just by public money. Public money, it's very important, it's very good, is still the small money. Combined development aid in the world, if we include nations like China, who doesn't call it aid but also provide assistance, is 150 billion US dollars. Combined investment in the world is something in the range of 20,000 billion US dollars. So the trillions are up there, and the small money, the billions and millions, are down there. Let's use the small money to make sure that we get the big money, to leverage the big money, to guarantee for the big money, but let's make sure that we get the trillions into the landscapes and into the renewable green economies. There is nothing wrong with having a normal profit from taking care of the planet. What's wrong is that you can have a profit from destroying the planet, polluting the planet, or producing the most evil weapon systems. That's wrong. But what we exactly want is to have business and job creation on the basis of a good green economy, and that's what we can do. And I'm very proud to say that at President Macron's event in Paris last week, I signed on behalf of UN and UN Environment an agreement with BNP Paribas, biggest bank in Europe. They will provide 10 billion US dollars to landscape restoration and to investment into the small-scale farmers, starting in Indonesia, moving on to India, and hopefully we can do this in other places. Rabobank has come up also with big money in this area, and we expect many others to follow. That's what we need, the 10 billions, not the millions. And then we need to engage with business. Finally, it's also very exciting here, let's reach out to the faith communities, the faith-based communities. Sadhguru, one Indian leader, is here. He has inspired any number of Indians to take care of the great rivers, the Ganga and the other rivers of India. He is getting from below what Prime Minister Modi is doing from above. Both of them trying to clean up and protect some of the most beautiful, but also some of the most polluted rivers on the planet. He can inspire many people because of his faith, his inspiration. Coming from that, all big religions on the planet, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Judaism, whatever it may be, all of them tell us to protect Mother Earth. Let's tap into that spirituality and use it to protect this planet, as the religions tell us, and then we need again to speak to a wider group of people than environmentalists traditionally do. So to sum up, if you do all this, reaching out to business, reaching out to faith-based groups, reaching out to local communities, and try to link our message to job creations with people who are desperate for jobs, then we are sure to be on the winning side. Then we'll do exactly what Mahatma Gandhi told us to do, not to do what we do, but to do what we are able to do, because the difference between what we are doing and what we're able to do is sufficient to solve all global problems. Danke schön.
Karin, please.
Excellencies, President Gurib-Fakim, Minister Hendricks, Minister Pohl, dear colleagues, both here and online. I knew it would be a tour de force to speak after Eric, but it's actually worse than I thought. So let me give it a try. First of all, it's an honor to be here today as we open a new chapter of the Global Landscapes Forum. As many of you may know, the World Bank has been a part of the forum, a partner of the forum since its inception, and so I'm really very honored to be here. For the World Bank, sustainable landscapes are integral to meeting our twin goals, and those two goals are ending extreme poverty in the world and boosting shared prosperity, and to do so in a sustainable manner. So forests, trees, healthy soils and landscapes contribute to economic growth, to jobs, to food and energy security, and economic and environmental resilience. And today, so I'm going to talk about why landscape restoration and landscape management is an urgency, why it's not optional, and about the positive trends that we are seeing when it comes to sustainable landscapes. And finally, I'm going to talk about what we think it will take to go faster and quicker to sustainable landscapes. So first, we heard already from President Gurib-Fakim that it is not optional to manage landscapes and to restore landscapes. It's not something that we can choose away because other things are also important. And why is that? Well, first, forest and landscape degradation carries a very heavy price tag. To give you an example, in Burundi, landscape degradation is about 4% of GDP on an annual basis. And the forest fires in Indonesia in 2015 cost the country more than what it cost to reconstruct Aceh after the tsunami, just to give you an idea about that. Then, as we also just heard, forest degradation and land use change contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. The estimates vary. They're around 12%. And actually, NASA reports that forest degradation emits more gases than the deforestation itself. And the situation is deteriorating quite rapidly. Some 24 billion tons of fertile soil are eroded every year, and about 12 million hectares of land are degraded. So it's then not surprising why we would see a lot of economic gains that could be had from halting forest loss and degradation and restoring degraded lands, because the gains are huge, some 170 billion a year for restoring the 350 million hectares that we all are talking about in the context of the Bonn challenge and the broadening of that challenge over the past year. So this is overall a bit of a gloomy picture, but thankfully there's some reason for hope. We know that change is possible and also that it's underway. We see that a number of countries are coming forward with strategies for large-scale forest and landscape programs and that want to make a shift towards sustainable rural economies. We also see that there is a new forest economy that is emerging. It is spurred by a variety of drivers. One is, and it may sound a little bit counterintuitive, but one is that there is a global growing demand for timber and forest products, which is expected to quadruple by 2050. There's an increasing investment in trees and forests by sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, and disaster risk management, because that makes economic sense. And there is a better understanding of the economic value of services from forests, such as water supply regulation and filtration, that underpin national economies. Now, these potential benefits from forests are significant in the landscape's context because producing sustainable forest products has the potential to create millions of rural jobs and to drive green growth, and that in turn is an incentive for forest and landscape restoration. Incorporating trees into agriculture improves crop yields and food security. I just was in Ghana a few months ago, and I saw how very poor communities in the semi-arid areas of northern Ghana were able to increase their yield 8-fold by relatively simple landscape restoration ways. And that really matters for these communities because they are semi-arid, they have, in the dry season, they have no food, so to be able to have such higher yields makes a huge difference for their way of life and also for being able to continue to live in those areas. And then finally, using trees for disaster risk management is a cost-effective means for reducing flooding and devastation from storms. So for example, in the Philippines, restoring mangroves to what they were in the 1950s would deliver more than $450 million per year in flood protection benefits. Now, I'd like to come to my last point that I want to talk about, and that is what will it take to get where we want to be in terms of sustainable landscapes even faster and with greater impact. And I think in a variety of fora during the Landscapes Forum, you are going to talk about that. And it will take what I like to call the 3 I's. It's information, innovation, and incentives. We need to put the right information and evidence-based data in the hand of ministers of finance so that they know what the cost of environmental degradation is, but also what the options are in order to deal with that challenge. We need to show proof that it is possible to restore and that it can be done in a cost-effective way. Some of the credible studies that are out there show that for $1 that you invest in landscape restoration, you can get a return of between $7 and $30. That's a pretty good deal when you're a finance minister and you need to make a decision where you will put your money and where your priorities are. And that is the information we need to create and that we need to get out. The second part is innovation. And that is both on the technology side and research side. We heard from the president earlier today how very little funding goes, for instance, to research in Africa. Well, we need more research in order to be able to see what we can do, but we also need more technologies. The other part of innovation is on the financing side, where we have to have new instruments and new ideas of how to combine public and private funding. And we see a lot of these things blossoming, and I'm sure that there is still a way to go of how we can go even further because the funding gap is very large. And then finally, incentives are needed to attract public and private investment and to establish progressive regulatory environments with good governance and clear rights so that sustainable landscapes can flourish. For instance, incentives that empower youth, like Ethiopia has done by providing thousands of landless youth with property rights in exchange for restoring degraded communal lands. And other incentives, of course, are also needed for the private sector. So in closing, let me say again that sustainable landscapes are fundamental for the future we all want, for people, for economies, and for the health of our planet. And that's why the movement that we are building together through the Global Landscapes Forum is so important. And together we can and we will make sustainable landscapes the priority that they must be. And let me just paraphrase Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, and he said something to the effect that the surest way to success is to keep trying. And I think that's why we are all here. Thank you very much.
So thanks again to all our speakers for the inspiring talks. I would like now to move on to the next panel session. Thanks again. So the next panel session. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. So we move on to the next panel session. I would like to welcome Andrew Steer from the CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility. Thank you.
Madam President, distinguished guests, ministers, we now come to an informal conversation. I'd like to invite three people to the stage. Roberto Barrero, who's the Program and Communications Director of the International Indian Treaty Council. Well done, Roberto. Selina Abraham, President, Selina, where are you? President of the International Forest Student Association and the GLF Youth Coordinator. And a friend of all of us, Naoko Ishii, Dr. Naoko Ishii, who is the Chair and CEO of the Global Environment Facility. And what we're going to do is have a conversation about what we've heard, and a conversation about how we bring some groups that absolutely need to be here, whose voices need to be heard, how we bring them into the conversation. So I'm going to come over there. You and I will share one. No, you sit here. Good. Well, look, on behalf of, my name is Andrew Steer, by the way. I'm the president and CEO of the World Resources Institute. For us, it's a great joy and privilege to be heavily engaged with this wonderful forum. I'd like to thank the German government for really leading on this. It's been quite a year, hasn't it, for the German government. G20 did a brilliant job there. The Bonn climate meetings, terrific job there. And now this wonderful meeting. And in the meantime, you had an election, which wasn't that simple either. So thank you for all you're doing. And where's Robert Nassi? Thank you. Congratulations on your new job. We're very proud of you. We're really delighted. And thank you for all of the organization of the Global Landscapes Forum. I was really struck listening to the speakers how common the theme was that we need to learn, but we need to put that learning into practice. The organization that I work for, WRI, we have a motto which is count it, change it, scale it. Counting is the analysis, data. But data and analysis on their own, nice to have. It's irrelevant, though, unless it leads to change. We need to prove that the ideas we have work on the ground. But in today's world, quite frankly, pilot success is not enough. We've heard today the incredible urgency that we have. So we need to think about scaling. None of us can scale on our own. Not even big governments can scale on their own. We need to work together. And so in this room, all of us need to be counters, changers, scalers. Some of us will be more on the counting, some more on the changing, some more on the scaling. That's what this is all about. You know, Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher, said we should act as thinkers and we should think as actors. And that's our challenge, isn't it, together? And I want to turn to our panelists now. First of all, Roberto, yourself. Tell us a little bit, we all know about the incredible sort of new insights that have come out recently on the role of indigenous people and the role of land tenure. We did some work last year, for example, that shows if you have land tenure as an indigenous group and you communally manage it and you have the legal right to protect that land, that, for example, deforestation falls by 70 to 80%. And the well-being rises. So we've got a sort of a whole range of new understanding about the role of indigenous people. Could you tell us a little bit about the International Indian Treaty Council and what you are trying to do to bring that message in, and why this particular forum is valuable to you?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here with all of you today and to be part of this conversation. I think as indigenous peoples, fundamentally, we know that we need a seat at the table. And we know that we need a seat at the table because if we're not at the table, then we're probably on the menu. And we've seen that over and over the years throughout our history. And so it's important to raise our visibility in these processes, but also to move beyond the powerful statements that are made, the beautiful statements that are made, and to really see the impact on the ground. We're beyond the declarations. We're beyond this talking and this beautiful way of phrasing things. But now we really need to see the implementation on the ground. I think that's the most important. And for us, it's really about the partnerships, right? For indigenous peoples, oftentimes we're categorized as within and around the vulnerable groups or the marginalized groups. And that's true to a certain extent. We can become vulnerable, but there's reasons for that, right? That has to do with rights, the impacts of colonization, etc. But moving beyond that, we need to be seen as partners, right? Real partners who have solutions. And I think as you just mentioned, and as the research has shown, that when we're not looking for saviors, right? We can save ourselves if we have the right tools and we're given the opportunity to save ourselves. And that comes with the respect of our rights. Oftentimes I hear in these conversations, well, we want to recognize the rights. We want to give indigenous peoples rights. But from an indigenous perspective, I think that we have to be honest about this and say that nobody's giving us our rights. Rights are inherent, right? Our rights are either respected or they're violated. And unfortunately, oftentimes, in the case of indigenous peoples, our rights are violated. So we have to move beyond. We have to have honest conversations. We have to be willing to take the criticism for people who are violating rights, and we have to be able to move on in strong partnerships.
That's fascinating. If you had to sort of summarize sort of how goes the battle for the indigenous people's rights that are so vitally important, what would you say? It was striking, for example, in the so-called NDCs, the Paris commitments, only 21 out of 197 countries referred to indigenous rights. And only one NDC actually said, as part of our climate efforts, we are going to extend those rights. And of course, we've proven that if you want to address rural climate issues, you better give more rights. So, and at the same time, I mean, in the United States, President Trump is pulling back on indigenous people's rights. He just last week cut by 90% sort of the national monument. In Brazil, we've seen some backtracking recently. How would you assess the overall battle?
Well, again, I think that we've seen some advancement in the recognition, right, or the acknowledgement that we have these rights. But I think that we had an earlier session today, a discussion, and it was brought up that, while we're talking about the advancement of rights or how these rights, for example, appear, the rights of indigenous peoples appears in the Paris Agreement, in the preamble, and for us, that should set the tone for how everything else is viewed. So we look at that preamble as the way to set the tone for the rest of the document and how the rest of the document should be interpreted. So the rights of indigenous peoples are right up at front, and that means, guidelines like the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, etc. So we have this foundation, we have these guidelines. Again, the implementation, and when we hear, as I was saying this morning, when we're in a time that there's such an extractive movement now, at the same time that the world is saying that we need to pull back, we need to have renewable resources, we need to work with local communities, but we see also this movement or this pressure now of extractives coming in, and we have these human rights defenders, right, who are being murdered. Global Witness did this report where over 200 environmental defenders were murdered in 2016, and a large majority of those people were indigenous peoples. So again, the rhetoric has to match what's happening on the ground, and we have to be honest about this.
Thank you so much. Selena, could we turn to you? You are a youth leader, and you've done remarkable things. You're an economist, you're a forester, and it's wonderful that under this conference series, you're representing young people. And of course, it's going to be your generation that feels the full brunt of some of the things. I did want to thank the president of Mauritius. Madam President, you gave a brilliant speech, really about the challenges. It was a speech of hope, but it was also a speech, quite frankly, of, there are some big, big problems. Now, as you listen to that, Selena, how do you how do you engage with young people? Are they up in arms? Obviously, some are, some aren't, but how do you go about your business?
Well, yeah, I think I have to echo that statement on the speech. What really resonated with me was that it's not optional, and you heard that echoed again by Karen Kemper. It's existential, and for us, you know, a lot of us feel that more because we're talking about these timelines that are more relevant to our futures and where we feel the true effects of the past and the history, and of course we must learn from it. So I think we feel a different sense of responsibility and obligation that is quite unique. But in general, the work that I've done in the past engaging youth, and I've done that through the International Forestry Students Association, as well as the Youth and Landscapes Initiative, which is a global community of young leaders who are committed to this landscapes philosophy of collaboration, diversity, empowering each other in action. So I think that is where I see the true light, and I think we're seeing this with the GLF. It's the power of networks, of coming together. And I'd like to touch on something that it's hard to do that, right? And at least for youth, I can say, and maybe Roberto can echo that for indigenous peoples, it's easy, you get a PR benefit from including voices. It sounds great, but the reality is it's very difficult and it can get messy when you get into the real heart of it. And so I think with the GLF, we have to be ready for those difficult conversations. If we feel like we can just show up and feel good for 2 days and leave, we're not doing our job right. It's really more comfortable to stay in the box than outside. So I'd like to just encourage everyone to remember that, because there's a diversity of voices within youth, within indigenous peoples. I can't stand here and say, you know, we're all like this, we're not. But what I can say is that those at least are in the room have, you know, driven from far, they're sleeping on their friends' couches, and it's all in an effort to learn and to educate themselves more. And, you know, we shouldn't take that for granted and really engage them in that.
That's terrific. We're so happy you're here and that your voice is so clear. Stefan Schmidt made an interesting point, which is that young people tend to leave rural areas. And, you know, 70% of us are going to be urbanized, and so many rural communities, at least in rapidly growing countries, tend to empty of some of their young people in rural areas. How do you think about that issue? I was struck also by what he said, is that actually 90% said they'd like to stay if things were different. How do you relate to that?
You know, it is a sad reality, because I think a lot of migration that often happens, it's not necessarily by choice. It's not that you desire to leave your family and what's normal to you and your culture, but it's this issue of economic opportunity, of conflict that is increasing from not having access to water or other resources. And we know we're going to see an increase of that in the future. And we can't blame young people for wanting to leave and want better. And personally, my family is from Eritrea, so I resonate with that a lot in terms of migration due to political instability or economic opportunity, and it's a reality for so many people. So I think it's something that we don't have an answer towards, but we know that it takes a greater approach. We're talking about transformational change in these rural areas, and I can at least say that on our side, we have youth who are committed. At the past 2 Global Landscapes Forums, we've had discussions on this topic, the youth-led discussion forums on rural migration and what we can do about it as young people. How can we engage with, you know, the spaces that we either have left or grew up in? So I think I can say we're committed to continuing this discussion, and I'd like to take that beyond this forum, right? There's so many partnerships that can happen while we're here.
That's terrific. Thank you. We're so happy you're here. Let's turn to Naoko Ishii, your chair and CEO of the Global Fund designed to protect the global commons. So you have a big responsibility. As you listen to the speeches this morning, you must just want to get out there and put more and more resources to make these rural space and landscapes even better, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Well, actually, we hear a lot of, you know, commitment and the passion on the mission. We hear the voices from the ground, voices from the future, and it's a political momentum is kind of gaining in this area. But in order for us to translate those kind of commitment or the vision to the action on the ground, we need a financing, and that's why that our institutions are actually fighting quite hard to get more resources and to do this work. I mean, we were actually in the middle of this and the negotiation, the funding, so-called replenishment negotiation, and for next 4 years we were asking that the 4 billion. But in order for us to do it, the one philosophy centered into this 4-year strategy is actually the transformational system transformation, because in order for us to actually fight against the global tragedy of the commons, we really need to think about how to transform our way of living and consuming and producing, and how to bring the harmony with nature. And besides the cities and the energy system, one very, very important key economic system is actually land use. Then 37% of the GHG emission comes from the agriculture or the land use, and so that's very important for us to actually work through this the landscape forum, how we could really trigger the system change. And you mentioned that the counting and changing and scaling, and we that the GF really want to be a catalyst of the transformational change to the land system use, and also that to scaling up our actions and your actions on the ground, so that we were committed, actually that we are actually thinking to actually $500 million or 4 billion should really go to this food and land use and restoration system change, and another $250 million should really go to Amazon, the Congo, or those important biomes. But the fundamental philosophy of thinking beneath this strategy is how we can bring that all partners network together and on the large-scale landscape, so that we can find out how to reconcile competing demands of the food and the livelihood, but also that how to keep that integrity of the ecosystem, which provides us a layer of the foundation for the future. So the landscape approach is fundamental for us to reconcile those competing needs and voices from the future, voices from the ground. And that's something we really to try to materialize.
How are we going to get more resources? I mean, it's great listening to the German government, because they actually do put very serious resources into landscapes. Actually, that's not true overall in the international aid architecture, and including even in, say, climate finance. Eric Solheim rightly said that more than 1/3 of the solution to climate change is in rural areas, and yet less than 10% of climate money goes into rural areas. There's something wrong here. Now, Naoko, you are going through a replenishment. You run, one of the best programs in the world on rural areas. I am hoping that all the donors are queuing up to increase their support for the Global Environment Facility. And if they're not, you have 1 minute to tell them, because some of them are in this room, 1 minute to tell them why they should be doubling their support for Global Environment Facility.
Actually, I really need your help to mobilize the financial resources so that all of us can really do our part to actually end up in this landscape approach to our entire program. It's not just actually that the rural, it's really the system change, the food system, the land use system, energy, and the city system. We all need this transformational change, and integration in the landscape is absolutely important, but donors are a little bit hesitant to how it really works. That we talk about that actually green community, maybe only talking to green community is a problem. Exactly, I think we need to get out of this comfort zone and to really talk to actually people who are yet to be converted. But unless we really do it, we only stay in this comfort zone in the green community, talking to green community, and we will not really save the world. So more courage is needed,
well,
all of us.
we've reached the end of our time. I'm going to give you each one sentence, though. And the question is this: what would you like to get out of this very important global restoration meeting here today and tomorrow? When you leave this place, you'd want to be saying, wow, that was good because what? Roberto.
Well, I'd like to see an increased partnership and visibility of indigenous peoples here. And I'd like to see the movement move from and support the movement from extractive relationships to implementing the indigenous peoples' principles of reciprocity, right, and regeneration.
Thank you. Perfect.
I think I'd like to see that all the young people who came to attend this conference, and there are more than 200, feel empowered and connected by each other, that they feel connected to the external community of the GLF that can help and support their goals, and that they feel like they learned more from this experience.
Great. Thank you so much. Naoko.
Yeah, at the landscape, you have opportunity, we have opportunity to reconcile all competing demands for the current generation, but also the future generation, indigenous people, and also the people living in, actually, the outside rural area. But in order for us to do it, we really need to have a courage and vision to get out of this comfort zone. And then I really would like to see, to this forum, to give us this courage to move out of our own comfort zone towards integration, and integration to the lot of sectoral interest, but integration of the future interest.
Great. Thank you very much. I would like to see us energized and informed and inspired to leave this place so that we push forward towards that wonderful tipping point in landscapes, which we are not a million miles away from right now. I'd like to thank you all. I'm not sure, is this the end of the first session, or do I hand back to you? So thank you very much to this wonderful panel. Let's give them a round of applause.
So may I thank again our great speaker. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for sharing with us your view, your thoughts. Thanks for leading. Thank you very much. And I guess so that we are, thanks you again. Thank you, Darren. So I guess we're going to move on, and we're going to have a video address now on the screen. This is from Alec Baldwin, actor and environmental activist. So enjoy.
I'm Alec Baldwin. It's a privilege to address this distinguished group of leaders, thinkers, and activists, all of you gathered for the Global Landscapes Forum. It is through my work with United Nations Environment that I learned about GLF, and I am grateful to Eric Solheim for making my participation today possible. I consider it a real honor to be part of this opening session. What could be more important than the vision presented in the GLF Manifesto? Learning, working, and acting together as a global community to break down barriers for a sustainable, healthy global environment. This is a movement worth building. It is clearly a movement of the people, and I am proud to join in. Because we desperately need the kind of vision and leadership that GLF is providing. My wife and I are expecting our 4th child next year, and I, of course, worry about what kind of world they will inherit. Will it be one devastated by corruption, greed, and an unstable climate? Or a sustainable, equitable world shaped by a positive vision of what it would look like if we all worked together? The intractable risks from continuing down our current path are real and dangerous, but the opportunities are at least as great. There are over 2 billion hectares of land, roughly the size of South America, that are degraded by unsustainable agricultural practices. We can restore them. There are indigenous peoples safeguarding many of the world's remaining standing forests. We can empower them with rights. There are solutions emerging every day that combine food security, livelihoods, and progress towards climate and development goals. We can champion them. There is a world of opportunity out there, and I know many of you are on the cutting edge of where that innovation happens. Despite notable dissenters and in the face of daunting challenges, people like you are forming unprecedented global, regional, national, and community partnerships and forging ahead to meet these sustainable development goals. Clearly, it is places like the Global Landscapes Forum where partnerships are born that are capable of the kind of transformational change that the world needs. Public sector actors, private sector companies, and civil society working in concert on the common goal of building a sustainable future and a healthy global environment. It's these partnerships, the ones that transcend barriers between
So I guess we have some technical problem. Let's wait a couple of minutes. And in the meantime, I wish to remind you that the plenary session of this afternoon/evening that will take place at 5:45 will be partially in Spanish, as I already told you before. So make sure that you have your translation device with you and pick it up next to the cloak room. And yes, well, I think I will see my face on the...
Let us find out what is possible. I am sorry not to be with you in person this year, but I recognize that this forum and this movement are about the long game, and I'll look forward to staying involved and hope to join you in person in years to come. For now, I send my admiration and appreciation for your commitment, dedication, and vision. It is a real honor for me to be associated with you and your important work, and I will look forward to hearing about all of the great things that you accomplish together. Wishing you a productive 2 days in Bonn.
Thank you everyone for being here today. I wish you a good lunch and I will see you later.